In 1991, near the village of Nova in Ukraine, a couple on a walk came across something truly strange. As they walked, they spotted a pack of dogs, but among the dogs, they noticed something shocking. A young girl, naked, moving with the pack. According to the couple, the girl was barking, running on all fours like the dogs, and howling just as they did. Authorities quickly responded to the scene and began searching for the girl the couple had described. The strange and heartbreaking story of Oxana Malaya, known to many as the Dog Girl. Oxana Malaya was born in 1983, near the village of Novaya in Ukraine, in a dilapidated farmstead. Her parents, by all accounts, were entirely neglectful, consumed by alcohol and other substances on a daily basis. The fact that she was born healthy was purely by chance, considering the circumstances. Despite this, sources say that Oxana came into the world without any complications. She lived on the rundown farm with her careless and impoverished parents. By the time she was 3 years old, she was crying so much that her alcoholic parents, in a thoughtless rage, threw her out of the house. They lived in a remote rural area, far from others, and tragically, no one saw or came to rescue the little girl. Oxana's true misfortune in life was her family. When she was thrown out, being in a rural area meant she faced countless dangers. Wild animals could have attacked her, or she could have frozen in the cold. But none of that happened. At just 3 years old, she crawled, instinctively driven towards the nearest sounds and movement. She was headed in the direction of a pack of dogs near the farmhouse. In that moment, Oxana was as vulnerable as any child could be, left outside and exposed to danger. Meanwhile, her parents continued their lives, intoxicated and indifferent, completely unaware of the peril their little girl faced. Oxana crawled all the way to the pack of dogs. In the rural areas, dogs that rarely encountered humans were often more wild and aggressive. But as I mentioned earlier, Oxana's misfortune seemed to end with her family. Incredibly, nearly everything else worked in the child's favor. The dogs didn't harm Oxana. Instead, they accepted her into their pack and took her under their protection. Oxana had now become a member of the dog pack roaming the outskirts of the village of Novaya. She ate whatever the dogs could find and drank from available sources like rainwater to quench her thirst. In reality, raw meat is filled with countless bacteria and pathogens that could seriously harm a human body. Yet, by sheer luck, Oxana suffered no such consequences. She ate raw meat alongside the pack, learned to bark, and even mastered walking and running on all fours. How she managed to communicate with the dogs remains a mystery. At 3 years old, Oxana had some basic ability to communicate with people. But when it came to the dogs, her survival was entirely instinctual. As I'll explain shortly, when she was later asked at the age of 30 how she had managed to communicate with the dogs, her response was simple: just making eye contact was enough. Oxana slept like a dog, howled when they howled and barked when they barked. After all the time she spent with the pack, there was nothing left in her life that resembled being human. She had truly become one of them. This went on for 5 years. During that time, her family didn't even bother to look for her. In fact, within a year or two after throwing her out, they had abandoned their rundown farm and moved away. It wasn't until 5 years later that someone finally noticed the little girl. When people living in the remote countryside finally noticed Oxana, their first thought was that she was something magical, or even cursed. And who could blame them? Imagine coming across a naked child running on all fours, growling, howling, barking, and licking herself clean. It's no wonder that thoughts of witchcraft or dark magic were the first to come to mind. Fortunately, one of the witnesses had the sense to notify the authorities. In 1991, when Oxana was 8 years old, officials managed to capture her, though not without difficulty, and took her to the hospital. When the authorities tried to take Oxana away, she resisted fiercely, barking and growling as she tried to prevent them from capturing her. Once at the hospital, she underwent thorough medical examinations. Due to moving like a dog during her critical years of growth and development, her bones and muscles showed unusual characteristics. Her knees, for example, had become particularly hard and calloused, while her wrists were much more flexible than those of a typical human, allowing her to walk and run with her hands bent. Despite these physical changes, there didn't seem to be any irreversible damage to her body. The real challenge, however, lay in Oxana's psychological state. If we look at the documents related to the case, it's clear that the authorities at the time were quite negligent in their handling of the situation. Fearing the outrage and backlash that would follow if the story gained widespread attention, both locally and nationally, they quickly closed the case without thoroughly documenting the details. Much of what we know today about Oxana's story comes from eyewitness accounts and testimonies, as official documentation was lacking. When Oxana was thrown out by her alcoholic parents at the age of 3, she still had some basic language skills. However, by the time she was found in 1991, living among the pack, she had completely forgotten how to speak human language. After a relatively straightforward physical rehabilitation, the real challenge began: intensive mental therapy. The doctors focused on overcoming the most critical issue: communication. They started speech therapy with Oxana, but when she was hurt or upset, she didn't respond like a human child. Instead, she growled, whimpered, or barked like a dog. When given instructions, she didn't question them or understand them as suggestions. She treated them as commands. Weeks of therapy passed, and the doctors made significant progress. They eventually reached a point where they could communicate with Oxana in a way that resembled normal interaction. A key factor in her recovery was that she had known some language at the age of 3. Despite this, Oxana's speech always remained peculiar. She never changed her tone, speaking in a flat, continuous voice without pauses, expressing only what she needed to say. Meanwhile, the authorities began searching for Oxana's family, trying to find the people responsible for her tragic situation. However, their efforts led nowhere, and Oxana's custody was officially transferred to the state. After her treatments and therapies, she was placed in a special boarding school for children with mental disabilities in rural Ukraine. There, Oxana continued her social and behavioral education for many years, working to adapt to a world she had once been shut out of. Throughout this time, the media kept a close eye on Oxana. Today, at 39 years old, despite years of treatment and effort, she has only reached the social skill level of a young child. According to her doctors, even with all the training and therapy, a full recovery is no longer possible, and she will never be viewed as a normal person by societal standards. However, Oxana is aware of her past and the life she has lived. She has expressed that it hurts her when people refer to her as the dog girl or feral child. According to the doctor who worked closely with her, Oxana showed a more human side than expected. She developed a decent sense of humor and grew to enjoy being the center of attention, traits that, considering her past, indicated a surprisingly good level of mental progress. However, certain distinct behaviors never fully went away. She walked with a somewhat masculine gait and preferred jokes that involved rough physical play. Although she could count to 10, she never managed to learn basic arithmetic and even struggled to spell her own name correctly. Her learning difficulties were so severe that even the simplest bits of information, which might seem easy to most people, failed to stick in Oxana's mind. The most important progress made with Oxana was teaching her to walk upright, speak and eat properly. Given her past, these everyday routines were significant achievements, as acquiring such skills becomes much harder with age. One of Oxana's greatest wishes was to reconnect with the family who abandoned her, but that never happened. Today, she lives under state care on a farm in rural Odessa. Although she spends her days with the farm animals, she never fully integrated into society. Despite this, Oxana has always demanded to be treated like a normal person. While some of her caregivers describe her as rough and primitive, I have a bit of good news. Our girl has a boyfriend who also lives on the farm, and they share a happy relationship. Oxana enjoys a peaceful life with the animals, and there have been no recorded incidents of harm or disruptive behavior. However, according to her caregivers, when she gets very angry, she still prefers to retreat into the forest to calm down. It seems some habits truly never die.